Welcome to Psych Sessions Careers, a podcast about how students can identify and prepare for careers that fit their unique interests and how instructors can help. I'm your host, Stacey Spencer. Whether you're a student trying to figure out what you'll do with your undergraduate psychology degree, an instructor who's looking to add to what you're already doing to support career preparation, or an instructor who wants to help but doesn't know where to start, these conversations are for you. Let's talk about careers. Hi, Dr. Jane Halonen. How are you?
I'm great today. How are you?
I'm very well. I want to start with an introduction of you so everyone knows how fabulous you are.
Ooh, I like that.
Why you're such an important person to talk to about careers. Let's start with the basics. You're at the University of West Florida.
Yes.
Okay. You're a professor.
Yes.
Your department is the Department of Psychology.
Correct.
All right. You have a PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
I do.
And when I did my homework, I don't know how I didn't know this, but you are a clinical psychologist by training.
I am. And a recovering clinician. I did have a private practice for a few years.
I love that, a recovering clinician. I bet that would pique some students' curiosity when you say it that way. You're co-author of a wonderful book, your co-author being Dana Dunn. It's called The Psychology Major's Companion, How to Get Where You Want to Go.
And it just came out in the third edition this month.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're excited about it.
Very good. You have so many contributions you've made around careers, but lots of other things as well. You've led many APA projects.
I have.
that are central to teaching psychology, and some that really align very well with talking about career preparation for students. Now, most recently, you led the group to revise the APA guidelines for the undergraduate psychology major. I always have to cheat and look because we all call that guidelines 2.0 now,
right?
Which will be guidelines 3.0.
3.0. Mm-hmm.
Right. And do you know when that's going to be released?
Oh, please, God, let it be released in August. APA has to take a vote on it at the convention. Yes. And fingers crossed, everything will go well so that it will become policy in August.
Awesome. That's wonderful. I know I've been waiting for it. I'm excited to see it. You were involved with I think of it as SNAP. So that stands for?
It was Summit on National Assessment in Psychology. Or right? Something like that. Yes.
And then between SNAP and Guidelines 3.0 was IPI, the Intro to Psych Initiative.
That's correct. And I was part of the woolly mammoths who managed the outcome assessment issues.
Well, that sounds appropriate, going from SNAP to that part of IPI. Is there anything else you'd like to add to all of those many things that you've been a part of?
Well, I think the only other thing I would add is that I served as chief reader for the Wacky Advanced Placement reading experience, which is the weirdest camp ever for smart psychology professors. I know they just finished and graded something like 300,000 exams this year, but wow. That tour of duty was very special to me. So I would mention that.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I can imagine what that's like. So many great people have served in that role. And it's a beast. It's grown and grown and grown. The story about it are fantastic. And if students are listening and you took the AP exam, you may want to Google some psych session interviews that talk about what that process is actually like. I think I'd be very curious if I had taken that exam, what happens in the back end to do the scoring. All right. So you're a really big deal. Tell me about your university. Tell me about the undergraduate enrollment, the psychology majors, just so we have an idea of who are the students that you're working with.
Okay. I'm at a regional comprehensive university. In fact, the only one left in the university system currently. We are on the panhandle of Florida, so that puts us in the central time zone and basically out of the attention of state legislators because I guess they ignore what's close to Alabama. Our major, we have 3 options for major, 2 that are face-to-face, 1 that's online, BA in both formats, and Bachelor of Science in face-to-face only. I think at last count, we were closing in on 650 majors
That's a large department.
It's a fairly large department, and unfortunately, a bit of a shrinking faculty, which I know is kind of a standard story across the country.
So is that people retiring and not replacing those slots?
We've certainly had that as a problem. And we're in a college where trying to get slots are competitive. And unfortunately, we're in competition with nursing, which is just gobbles up lines like crazy. And I know that's also not unique to my institution.
Right. It's true. So in terms of your majors, what kinds of interests do they first express to you when they come and say, I want to be what are the things that they're thinking about?
I think the two things I hear about most often, I want to help people. And often that translates into, I want to be a clinical psychologist, which for the majority of students isn't going to be possible. So that means that we might be crushing dreams right out of the gate. And I also hear a lot about, I want to be a profiler, which is also one of those problematic goals, because if you want to profile serial killers, thank God the demand for them is not big.
I love that. Yeah. It's true. It's true. And that comes from, I hear that a lot as well. And it's interesting because it's gone from forensic psychology, students saying, I want to be a forensic psychologist, because a misunderstanding of what that means. They don't understand that that is a clinician, a clinically trained person. Now they're coming to me saying criminal psychology. So it sounds like somehow it's getting out there that what they want to do is more along the lines of something else about behaviors, criminal behaviors, and so on, and less about the clinical aspects of that. All right. So I like to ask the question, did you have a kindergarten career day? Do you remember in elementary school having something, kindergarten, first grade, where you were asked to say, this is what I'm going to be when I grow up?
Well, maybe not in kindergarten. I barely remember that. And I won't even tell you how many years ago that would have been. But as I recall formulating what I wanted to be, I probably wanted to be a princess. And there's not much job call for that. And then once I gave that up, I had an assortment of things that I wanted to do. I thought being a PE teacher would be fun. I thought doing something maybe in writing. I cherished that goal actually all the way into college. I was a journalism major for a while. I thought being a playwright would be good. So I had lots of various dreams that all went by the wayside once I got into my intro psychology class.
So that was it. You took intro to psych and you were
hook, line, and sinker. It just something about the language being spoken, the examples being spoken made me feel like I was at home. And I, like many students, thought, oh, I'd like to be a clinical psychologist. I didn't realize at the time how incredibly difficult that pathway is because of how competitive it is. And I'm very open about saying the first year I applied for graduate school, I didn't get in. I was heartbroken, but I think I wasn't especially advised well to try to help me figure out what schools would be more interested in me. It turns out I had a low board score that kept me out of contention. And so I was lucky enough to manage to get a few acceptances on my second attempt. Once I discovered psychology, I knew I was going to do something in psychology. I wanted it to be clinical. And fortunately, I had enough resilience and staying power to make that work.
Interesting. So my story is I didn't get into graduate school the first time I applied either. And I applied to clinical programs. But the funny part about it is I didn't want to be a clinician. So I thought that's what you did. I wanted to be a professor. I knew that. And I knew I needed a PhD to be a professor. I had no idea there were other kinds of programs. And I loved research. My first publication was my senior comprehensive project. And so I was, as soon as I was in psychology and realized we can answer questions that are interesting to us, that was my hook. I was like, I want to answer those questions. So I was doing research, my own research as a senior, which I look back and think, how did I have the what's the word? I'm trying to think of the polite word for it. How did I have the gumption to do that? What was I thinking?
I would say chutzpah.
Chutzpah. Yeah. How did I have the chutzpah to think that I would be able to do that? But it was a phenomenal experience. But back to, not getting in. Shortly after I applied, I was invited to a lunch with a guest speaker, and another student asked for advice on applications. And that's when I realized nobody told me what was important in the application process, that you really need to be a great fit. And I work very hard with my students to make sure they know what the best fit is for them and know what the options are. But we do know that the big challenge is if students ask the first question, what can I do with this degree? The answer is really challenging because there's not a simple answer to that. I watched a presentation you recorded with Dana Dunn for PsyChi. Same title as your book. And you quoted Dr. Seuss. Do you remember the quote by heart, or do you want me to read it? Because you
better read it, because I think we had 2 quotes from Seuss in the book.
Okay. Let me make sure I'm reading the first. Okay, because I have the second part to the quote. You have brains in your head. You have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction you choose. So tell me what that quote means to you.
Well, I think when we're working with psych majors, there's so much work that has to be done in helping them develop an offensive narrative about choosing psychology, because they're going to be surrounded with people with good intentions who will say really crappy things to them about their bleak future. And the fact is, I believe a psychology major is perhaps the most flexible liberal arts degree you can have. And so I think if you do a good job in your major, you actually can go in so many directions. And in fact, that's one of the things I'm really most proud of in the book that we just published. We profiled an enormous range of people doing interesting things that are sometimes kind of high profile. For example, one of our profiles is the director of the Lincoln Park Zoo, who was a psych major. We also have this interesting woman who developed a cat recovery and restaurant, that she takes in cats that are problematic, rehabilitates them, lets them be present during restaurant hours, and provides an adoption service. She did that as a psych major. The fact is, there are just unlimited kinds of things that you can do. The problem is the pathway is not always clear cut, that jobs may benefit from the kinds of outcomes that psychology majors learn, but it may not say, ooh, psychology major wanted. So you have to be pretty inventive and flexible when you're trying to figure out your own career path.
Yeah. So going on with the Dr. Seuss quote, the next part is, you're on your own and you know what you know. You are the guy who'll decide where to go. And that, for me, is exactly what you're saying. We need to make sure they know. We need to make sure that they can articulate what it is that they have. And I love the concept psychological literacy. People who don't know what that is, it's the ability to apply the knowledge and skills you gain through the major. And that should be the goal. And I think what happens in a lot of departments from the student perspective is it's a checklist of things. I need to do all these things. And those courses are treated very separately. And there might be a course the student really, it grabs them, whether it's human development or maybe social psych, or for me, health psych. It grabs them, but then they're left with, well, I don't know what to do with that.
Correct.
And so I would agree that we really need to build in opportunities for students to practice responding. I have an assignment called the Yes You Can assignment, and it's at the end of their fall semester of their last year. And it's taking everything that we've been talking about for 3.5 years, and they get to choose the prompt, but they've all heard it. They've all had all these jabs thrown at them, and they get to frame what that response is so that they're informative without being defensive. And they're articulating the breadth of the field as well as the skills that psychology majors have. And they have to do it in just a couple of minutes. It's recorded. They love this assignment They love the idea that we're acknowledging the fact that we've all been jabbed. And I tell them, I used to be extremely defensive and make jokes. You know, you are a psych major. Are you analyzing me? And I would say things, sounds awful now. Yeah, I did. It was quick. It wasn't that interesting. But that's not. Yeah. Okay.
Ouch.
Yeah. But I just remember feeling kind of wounded by that. And why are you coming after me? So what I realized is people say that for a lot of reasons. One is probably if they're students, they're wondering about their own major.
Sure.
And they're maybe projecting that onto you, their own concerns. Maybe they're just repeating what they've heard other people say and they just want to say something. But we're going to assume that it's because they actually want to know. So we're going to take it as an opportunity to educate and inform in a way that's respectful and clear. And it's really kind of changed. And for me, it changed my students' experiences going out the door, right? Because they're armed, they're ready. But on my end, thinking assessment, I've got this great assessment tool built in because I can see, can they do this? How well can they articulate that?
I do something similar in my capstone class where I say, well, you're going to seize the narrative that when someone microaggresses against you for being a stupid psychology major, I create several scenarios, have groups working. Say, I want you to do two things. First, I want you to let the id monsters fly. So somebody says something tacky to you and you just let her rip. I mean, no profanity, but demolish that, get the bad feeling out, and then turn it into a teachable moment so that you're an ambassador for psychology. Show us those skills. Show us that you can teach people the value of being in psychology because what you can do. And usually the students are hammy enough that we have such a good time with the id monsters that it paves the way for them to feel more comfortable and prepared for those kinds of encounters that they're guaranteed to have. I still get that occasionally when I meet people and they learn I'm a psychologist and they say, oh, don't analyze me. It taxes my patience, and I don't do the id monster thing. Well, I do the id monster thing in my head, but I usually try to turn that into a teachable moment.
Right. I think we need to arm our students with that ability to do so. Also, I tell my students it would break my heart if I ran into them in 5 or 10 years. I know Eric Landrum has a story related to this, and I think you do too, where the student says, yeah, I'm not using my psych degree. And so I say, if I ran into you at 5, 10 years down the road, and you were to kind of feel embarrassed about what you're doing because you think it doesn't relate, then I have not done my job.
I agree with that entirely. When I'm on one of many missions doing academic program reviews, which I really love to do, go onto other people's campuses, cause trouble and leave. I will often try to pull students aside and not necessarily the handpicked students that they want to show off, but and just say, now that you're about finished with your major, what can you do with it? And I can't tell you the number of times that students have a completely deer in the headlights look that they have not really thought about how all of the coursework that they're checking off has made a difference in how they think and what they can do. And they'll say, oh, well, I took statistics. So does that mean that you can perform statistics? Those are two different things, taking a course and now having that as a skill set. So I think putting students through their paces at the end of a course, whatever the level is, to be able to say, how are you different? What can you do now that you couldn't do before the start of the class is an important assessment lesson.
I would agree with that. I'm curious about guidelines 2.5. I don't know what to call it right now because we're between 2 and 3.
3.0 draft.
3.0 draft. Do you bring that into your courses in a direct way? Do you show your students in a formal class setting, these are the things?
I do. I use the guidelines as a way of framing the outcomes that I'm working on in almost all of my classes, but I explicitly use it again in my capstone class where I do a very challenging assignment. Students tell me it's challenging. Their eyes bug out when I tell them what we're going to do. But in my class, what I do is I set them up with someone who's practicing in the area the student hopes to enter. And that can be anything from real estate to healthcare to grad school to being a professor. I match them with someone who's successful in the field. And the deal is that I say, you'll have an hour interview with this person, and your job is to convince them that you have met the Guidelines 3.0 criteria, that you need to be able to haul out examples that illustrate these outcomes are things that are part of your skill set. Mm-hmm. And typically students are frightened by having to talk with strangers, but when they're going to be on the job market, they're going to be talking to strangers. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I want to give them an empowering experience. Of course, I'm very careful about the people I pick. I don't pick bad guys. I pick people who are interested in talking with students. And then they usually come back from that experience and say, that was the most thrilling thing I've done as a major, because I just didn't realize how all of the course experiences I've had have come together to make changes in me. And now I feel like I'm prepared to go interview or to apply. And it's like, well, good. That was the goal. Then you'll forgive me for being bug-eyed, for causing that bug-eyed condition at the beginning. It's normal for you to be scared, but when you're scared, you prepare. And you should have a pretty good conversation. And if anything goes awry, let me know. But typically the students really enjoy the outcome of that, mm-hmm. of that assignment.
Good. I can imagine. It really pushes them out of that comfort zone. And again, it's having them articulate the things that we want them to be able to say, not just tell them, because there's a big difference. We can get up in front of them and saying, hey, through the major, you're going to accomplish all of these. By the time you graduate, you'll have these skills, this knowledge. It's another thing for them to be able to say it themselves. It's the basic persuasion, right?
Well, and if they don't have a game plan, actually, if they don't have a plan A and a plan B, for mm-hmm. after graduation, I feel like I will have failed. And in fact, one of my favorite assignments, I do this in positive psychology. We cancel class for the day and meet in the library in a big presentation space. And students' jobs for the day would be to convey who they plan to be in 5 years. Mm-hmm. Now, in positive psychology, that's not all psych majors. Usually, I'd say 2/3 are psych majors, but they can do that either through a trifold poster display or a website. But I also have a segment in the middle. We have 3 shifts where students can do live performance. So they can do original dance, they can do original music, they can do spoken word, they can do whatever they want, but I limit the performances to 5. Mm-hmm. And now, again, to give them practice with strangers, I have external assessors come in and talk with them about what their plan is, and mm-hmm. also grade them using a rubric that addresses how clear their goals were. Did they cite a positive psychology hero in the works, and assorted other criteria. And again, it's probably the most fun day in the class, in part because you get to see this array of students mm-hmm. with such creativity that they normally do not get to exercise in more traditional assignments. They love it. The assessors love it. I have people who volunteer permanently to come in and assess it because especially the live performances and the poetry, it's just really powerful. So I love that. But in particular, it is practice both at talking to strangers and having a plan B. What mm-hmm. happens if you don't get to do what you want? What's your plan B?
I love that that's built into a content course like positive psychology, because I do think a lot of colleagues I talk to, not necessarily at my institution, but people teaching around the country, the globe. When I talk about what my passion is for careers, they'll say, well, I don't know anything about careers. And they want to say, well, I don't teach that course. Do you have an introduction to the major course and or a careers course built into your curriculum and to your major?
Happily, we do. And it's taught by several people, but the driving force is just a brilliant person who serves as an adjunct in psychology. I'm pleased to say that she uses our book mm-hmm. as a text for the class. I also use that in my capstone class. And we do some coordinated things. We talk about this as the bookends of the class.
Yeah.
Intro to the major and now exit from the major.
And so approximately what time or what year in the curriculum are they taking that course? I'm assuming it's as they declare. So
as they declare. Mm-hmm. So usually it's going to be second semester, first year, or mm-hmm. first semester, second year would mm-hmm. be typical.
So when I talk to people, they think, well, that's where anything career related should be. And I disagree because, like I said earlier, if a student is really excited about a particular topic, a course, that's what's got them inspired. That's the time for them to also be exploring, how can I use this? What are the many ways that I could do that? And there's so many ways. We won't get into that here, but yours is a really good example. So in your example from positive psychology, I can see that'd be fairly easy for an instructor to adopt, right? Because the first example for capstone is a little bit more intensive in that you've lined up the people they're going to meet with, right? You've
That's
identified
correct.
Which students need. I mean, it would take forever for some students to actually find someone. That's adding a layer of intimidation that is unnecessary. So I'm thinking with your first example, talking about that from capstone, it might be a little overwhelming for most instructors, colleagues to hear about using that in a course. Can you think of a variation of that would be a little easier for people to adopt?
Certainly. I think something that I did before I adopted the external assessment strategy in capstone is simply having students do a reflection, write a reflection as part of a portfolio that provides documentation that they've achieved the outcomes, or that they can reflect on where they haven't quite come up to the standard. That you don't. What's nice about career issues is you don't necessarily have to have the professors engaged, but I think what we'll see in Guidelines 3.0 is a much stronger push for professors to own that we need to make this link with students' futures. So I don't think it is requiring professors to do very much additional work to be able to say, well, what are all the ways in which we might see this in the workforce? I think another hobby horse I like to ride a lot is that going into the workforce is just as honorable as going to graduate school. And I think if you anytime you're teaching an advanced class, you should be able to come up with how do the principles of sensation and perception or cognition or human development, how might that influence what your behaviors might be as a workforce person? A short discussion, maybe it could be an extra credit assignment, but helping students make that link, because they're not likely to do that on their own. They're not likely to think about the specific significance of this course in relation to their future unless we ask.
And I think that's true for a lot of reasons. I think they're overwhelmed and they're focused on doing well in their courses. And so to take on the career part on their own is a daunting task. If we have colleagues saying, I don't know how to help with that, then of course the students don't know where to begin. And I do think we have a responsibility there. I think the other, that we also know they're working a lot, but we need to give it the time. I just think we're beyond the point where we can think about these courses sit in isolation and we should just enjoy learning about these things, right? That we do need to connect it to the application. And that's what makes psychology so awesome, is that it can apply to so many different kinds of careers. And for me, I say to people, you don't have to be the expert. If you task the students with getting the information, you learn with them and they love that. So if you were to say, go look for jobs that you can make a connection between this content with, go look what's out there. You can do it by occupational titles. I think that's a little less interesting than going for actual job titles in some of the job search engines. That's an activity they could do in a small group. They could do it and then present out. And now you've expanded that understanding within that group, but also you as the instructor have learned from them. Oh, that's another great example I hadn't thought of.
Well, I think you're proposing a paradigm shift that we badly need, frankly, that expands professors' responsibilities about the care and grooming of students for their future. So often, I've heard professors say, well, unless you're going to be a social psychologist, I can't help you.
Yes.
And then that also sometimes comes with a sense of shame, especially if you're not going to go to grad school, as though going into the workforce is a lesser activity. And that's why I think the stories when you run into students later on and they say, oh, I'm not doing anything with psychology. And in fact, they're doing wonderful things that fit the skill set, but they have learned a sense of shame that overpowers their identification as psychology thinkers. That is criminal in my mind. So I think we simply need to help faculty be more comfortable, not having all the answers, but being willing to do some of that investigation with students, I think would be ennobling and would certainly help promote that paradigm shift.
Right. And again, it's thinking differently about it. You don't have to be the expert. We're trained to be problem solvers. And so the job is to help the student solve the problem. Here is the problem. This is a topic in psychology, and we want to figure out where it can be used, the broad range of applications of that. Let's do that together. And you don't have to know the answers. Students do not want us to stand in front of them, and they think they want us to tell them what they can do with the degree, but they don't really want that because their eyes glaze over after the first slide of lists of things. When you get to slide 10, they're done. It's because we can't really do it that way. And I think doing it within the content courses is the best way to expose them to the breadth. I found it fascinating that after my undergraduate curriculum, I'm still thinking I have to apply to clinical programs. I took all these other wonderful courses. I loved language and memory and sensation and perception and all those things. And yet I had no idea how to think about those in the context of life outside of academia. So we talked about assignments you have in your courses and how instructors might incorporate those. What are some things that students could do on their own rather than wait for a professor to give them that assignment? So if we have student listeners, how would you frame the things your students have been doing in a way that they could go off and do on their own?
Well, I think I would probably encourage students as they enter the major to do some sort of journal or repository about what they're thinking, might be career focused. I would encourage them to take a look at the APA website because there's an awful lot of information about careering there. I also am a big advocate of nail down a mentor if you can. Find someone that you can ask even stupid questions about careering, and it doesn't have to be the best teacher in the department. It can just be someone that you feel comfortable with. All of those things, I think, transpire outside of specific classes. But in classes, if a faculty member has not been clear in identifying what the skills are that they're grooming, I think most people are obligated to think in outcomes and write outcomes, even if they don't teach it that way. It's useful at the end of the course to sit back and think, all right, now how am I different? What is it I have learned to do? And from a career standpoint, does this shed any light at all on where I want to go? And it might be that the answer is, I just took brain and behavior and I don't want any part of neuroscience.
Yes.
And that's a perfectly good conclusion. But I think being very active and self-advocating along the way will make you a much smarter senior and will position you well to be able to pursue a path that will pay off.
I like that. Do you think it would be reasonable to suggest that students who don't have a careers course or an introduction to the major course or any course where the career conversations are being held, do you think it'd be appropriate to send them to the guidelines? You can download the guidelines and go through that list of outcomes and really think about those in how they're accumulating the knowledge and skills as they're progressing through the major.
That's a really good question, and it reminds me of unfinished business that we have with the guidelines. We are poised for approval, but one of the suggestions that we had, and I think this came from Paul Heddick when we got some feedback on Guidelines 2.0, is the need that we have to take Guidelines 3.0 and translate it into a more student-friendly format. And I think that certainly is something that we can bring up with CABE, the Council of Associate and Baccalaureate Education that APA runs, because I think in its present form, Guidelines 3.0 is pretty heavy lifting for students. But I think a modified version of that would be really helpful. Thanks for reminding me of that. Oh gosh, there's another item for the desktop.
Yeah, and I think it'd be great to have students to either contribute to putting it in words that students would understand in a framework that makes sense to students, or at least having them provide feedback on it and catch where things still sound very academic, because it's true. It is written in a way that makes sense to instructors who think a lot about learning outcomes and goals. And just the phrasing that we use doesn't always lend itself to the non-professor audience.
Yes. And we tried hard to make sure that we were jargon reduced, but we are academics. And so I think that does come out. And students can certainly just look at the summary of outcomes, and that would work. That's an excerpt from Guidelines 3.0, but I do think a student-ordered version would be better. So I'll certainly bring that up with the APA folks.
I think that'd be fantastic. All right. So would you like to play a game?
Well, let's try.
Okay. So I have a list of jobs, and I've pulled them from job postings in your area. So these are not from where I am. I'm in the greater Boston area. These are specific to where you are. And I'm going to read the job title, and I want you to tell me based on that title if you believe this requires graduate education or if someone with a bachelor's degree would be eligible.
Okay. I'm ready.
Here's the first one. Infant, toddler, developmental specialist. I can tell you a little bit about what they do if it helps.
Yes, please.
Okay. They're responsible for conducting assessments, assisting with the development and implementation of the child's developmental support plans. They need to have the ability to build strong supportive relationships with parents and other caregivers. They need a respect for cultural diversity, excellent written and verbal skills, high level of integrity.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
I believe a bachelor's person who is a strong student could handle that.
Absolutely correct. The degree requirement for that is a bachelor's degree. All right. Now, this is a perfect example of where job titles are not informative at all. So the job title is training specialist, a training specialist. All right. The essential functions are to work with the training coordinator, to work with other staff to strengthen the effectiveness of service delivery to children and families, including foster and adoptive parents. Develop and train pre-service and in-service courses that are consistent with the system care plan. In collaboration with the child welfare professional supervisor, mentor provisionally certified child welfare professionals transitioning from the classroom to the field to assist in the transfer of learning. I could go on. Is that enough to make
That's enough. I think that could also be done by a bachelor's person.
You are correct. I think those are great examples of opportunities where students can, if they do want to go on to graduate school, develop some really great skills and experience. I know that we would agree that research experience is also very important if you're applying to clinical programs. But if someone is looking for some work, that would be a great way to be entering the workforce right away. How about an academic advisor?
Bachelor's degree.
Yes.
Bachelor's degree. And in fact, right now, one of my colleagues is a former honors student of mine who is, I think he's associate director of the Career Center, and a student that was working with me as an undergraduate TA just got a job there as an advisor. So yes, bachelor's will work.
So it's interesting. Our advising system has master's level advisors. And so I was excited to see that there are universities with the bachelor's level. But it also made me think about students, again, if they want to go to graduate school and they enter a program that doesn't help fund the student education, a lot of PhD programs that are research programs, clinical research programs, have stipends and they may have tuition remission, but there are a lot of graduate programs that don't. If you've worked as an advisor, it's possible that as a graduate student, you could be a graduate assistant or work as an advisor and get the benefit to help pay your tuition. So always thinking of the creative ways of paying for graduate school. I have one more. So far, bachelor's, all of them. Am I throwing in a ringer here? Let's see. Criminal investigator, special agent, United States Secret Service.
Oh boy. This is one of those situations where probably a master's degree would be preferred, but under the right circumstances, with the right job definition, the right skills, a bachelor's person might qualify.
Mm-hmm. So what it comes down to is a bachelor's level person does qualify. And I've seen this with other federal positions where rather than say required, preferred, they're listing what the government level, the GL, is for that position. So if you come in with a bachelor's degree, you're at a defined level that comes with a certain compensation and also a set expectation of experience and education. And they do say bachelor's degree, accredited college or university with superior academic achievement based on class standing, grade point average, or honor society membership. So students who are really interested in that kind of work, because we know we have a lot of students who think about that, they also get the message there aren't jobs out there, that it's very competitive. Well, it is competitive. They want you to be a superstar, but the jobs are out there and you can do that with a bachelor's degree. The other thing is, the bachelor's degree, we think of it as the first job out of college. That is a starting point. It's not the end point.
No, it's not.
And, it's important for all of us to remind students, this is a journey. Graduation isn't the destination, right? Even graduate school isn't the destination. I have a lot of students who make it sound like I just need to get to that and it's all good. It's like, no, you have this windy path, and along the way, you're going to make lots of decisions and discover things about you that will influence what happens next. So, well, wonderful. I think we've got some great takeaways for instructors. I think some simple things, some more complicated things, but also great things that students could take away from our conversation. Anything else you'd like to add?
I think we've been pretty thorough, and I hope that it makes a difference in promoting the Spencer paradigm shift.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.